The moment my stepson's words left his mouth, the entire backyard went silent. Forks stopped midair. Someone's laughter cut off like a record scratch. My husband's face drained of color so fast, I thought he might faint into the potato salad. 23 years old, engaged, his fiancée's hand frozen in his, and Dylan said the one sentence he'd been saving up for 12 years. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted everyone to watch it land. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this exact moment longer than he'd been engaged. My name is Heather King. I'm 45, and I want to tell you what happened at that barbecue and everything that came after, because I think a lot of women out there will recognize themselves in this story. Women who gave everything to a family that wasn't originally theirs and got nothing back but silence. That Saturday was supposed to be a celebration. Dylan had proposed to Emily in April, and my husband Stephen wanted to throw them an engagement party. String lights, a rented flower arch, the works. I spent 2 full days on it, ordered the good brisket, picked up Emily's favorite lemon cake because she'd mentioned once, months earlier, that she loved anything lemon, and I remembered. Ironed the tablecloths myself. Stephen kept telling me to relax. We both knew that wasn't really true. If I didn't do it, it didn't get done. That had been true for 12 years. I married Stephen 3 years after his first wife, Diane, died of ovarian cancer. Dylan was 11 then, quiet, watchful, grieving in a way adults mistake for shyness. I never tried to be his mother. I never asked him to call me mom, never tried to replace a woman I'd never met, but had come to respect through the photographs still hanging in our hallway. I just tried to be steady, show up, make sure he had lunch money, clean uniforms, someone in the stands at his games. What almost nobody in that backyard knew was how much further than showing up I had actually gone. At the party, Stephen stood at the head of the table with a glass of sparkling cider. Dylan doesn't drink, and gave a toast about family, about how proud he was, how far Dylan had come. He thanked our friends, thanked Emily's parents, and then, almost as an afterthought, and of course Heather, for putting all this together today. 12 years condensed into 6 words, tacked onto a toast about someone else. I didn't say anything. I've learned not to. But Dylan, 2 beers in, and riding the high of his own engagement, decided that offhand mention was the perfect opening. Yeah, well, he said, loud enough that the whole yard turned. Let's not pretend Heather's ever really been part of this family the way Mom was. He laughed. Not a real laugh, something that had been sharpening for years. No offense, Heather, but you'll never be half the woman my real mother was. I felt Emily's hand tighten on his arm. I saw Diane's sister Rachel, 2 seats down, not looking surprised at all. I saw Stephen's mouth open, then close, the way it always did when Dylan needed correcting, and Stephen never had the courage. 12 years of paid tuition, paid insurance, paid medical bills, paid everything. And this is what I was owed, a public reminder that I would never measure up to a ghost. I set down my napkin. I didn't cry, didn't raise my voice. I'd learned neither ever changed anything in this family. I looked at Dylan, then at Stephen, and said the only thing that felt true. Good, then let your father handle everything from here. I've done my part. Nobody else in that yard understood what I meant. To them it probably sounded like a dramatic exit line, but Stephen understood. I watched something collapse behind his eyes. He knew exactly what I'd been carrying alone for over a decade, and he knew I was finally putting it down. I picked up my purse, said a polite goodbye to Emily's parents, and walked to my car while the party tried to recover behind me. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to the office of Margaret Collins, my attorney and financial advisor for 15 years. She'd given me a key years ago, back when we first structured my inheritance. Some conversations can't wait for business hours. I let myself in, sat in the client's chair for once, and finally let myself think about everything I'd built, and everything I'd buried. I need to explain something, because it's easy to picture some grand, dramatic sacrifice made once with fanfare. That isn't what happened. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways worse. It seeps into your bones instead of leaving a scar you can point to. When Stephen and I married, he was a good man in a hard position. Steady income, still paying off medical debt from Diane's illness. I came into the marriage with a modest, well-managed inheritance and a consulting career that paid well and asked little of my time. I never flaunted it. I understood, even early on, how fragile Stephen's pride was where Dylan was concerned. The first time I stepped in was Dylan's freshman year, when he tested into a private academy with a strong science program, tuition nearly $18,000 a year, money Stephen simply didn't have. I remember him at the kitchen table with the acceptance letter and a legal pad, his jaw tight with the particular shame of a father failing his son. I didn't ask if he wanted my help, I just said I'd take care of it, and that we didn't need to make it complicated. He looked relieved and ashamed at once. Dylan never once asked how his tuition was covered. He simply believed his father had found a way, because that's what fathers do. That became the pattern. Car insurance at 16. I paid it, told Stephen to call it a work discount. Emergency wisdom tooth surgery sophomore year of college, nearly $3,000. Transferred the same afternoon. Stephen made the call. A dead laptop 2 weeks before finals. Overnighted a new one. $11,000 of graduation debt Dylan never told his father about. Paid off quietly through an account Margaret helped me set up. Something Stephen and I only ever called the fund. When Stephen's home inspection business collapsed under a failed loan, I covered the shortfall so it wouldn't touch our credit. When the house needed refinancing after a rough patch, I restructured everything with Margaret so Stephen never knew how close we'd come to real trouble. Every time, Stephen took my hand, sometimes with tears in his eyes, and said the same thing. I'll tell him someday. He deserves to know what you've done for this family. Someday never came. Sitting in Margaret's office that night, I finally let myself ask why. Stephen wasn't cruel, wasn't calculating. I think, in fairness, he was simply afraid. Afraid that if Dylan knew the truth, he'd stop seeing his father as the provider, the protector, the man who held their broken family together after Diane died. Stephen needed to be that man in his son's eyes more than he needed to be honest with him. And without ever saying it directly, he let his son build an entire identity around resenting me, a woman who'd married into comfort, rather than the woman who'd quietly provided it. I told Margaret I wanted to restructure the fund, effective immediately. She didn't ask if I was sure. I signed one document that night, nothing dramatic on paper. Every automatic transfer tied to Dylan, to Stephen's old debts, to the refinancing safety net, would end in 14 days. I drove home past midnight. Stephen was still at the kitchen table in the dark, waiting. He didn't ask where I'd been. Somewhere underneath the fear on his face, he already knew. Automatic systems don't collapse all at once. They fail in stages, quietly, so no one notices the pattern until it's too late to explain away as bad luck. On day 9, Dylan's student loan servicer flagged a missed payment. The transfer that usually covered the gap had simply stopped. Stephen told him it was probably a bank glitch, then quietly moved $200 from our actual joint account. Nowhere near enough. On day 11, Dylan's car insurance lapsed. He found out from a cop after a broken taillight stop. Stephen cashed out an old savings bond to scramble together $400 he didn't have. By the second week, it was Emily who noticed. She was thoughtful, observant. A third-grade teacher, the kind of person trained to notice patterns. She saw Dylan coming home from calls with his father looking pale and evasive. She saw Stephen, normally warm, grow tense and short. When Dylan's health insurance reimbursement failed to process, she asked him directly what was going on. I don't know, he admitted. Dad says it's some accounting mess. He's handling it. Handling it how, he couldn't say. Stephen, meanwhile, was drowning, picking up extra shifts, quietly asking a coworker about a personal loan, telling Dylan there'd been an investment delay when the home equity payment came due. What struck me most, watching from a distance, was that even now, even as his son's life buckled, Stephen still would not say my name. He chose bank mistake over your stepmother finally stopped. I didn't call Dylan. I didn't call Emily either, though she started texting me more. Small, ordinary questions, little threads that felt like she was quietly keeping a door open. I answered warmly. She hadn't said a cruel word to me in 2 years. She was simply caught, without realizing it yet, in the middle of something much bigger than an argument about tablecloths. It was Emily who found the first thread. Helping Stephen sort through an accounting mess, one evening, she noticed something odd in an old tax folder. A line item on years of statements she didn't recognize. 3 words, appearing again and again. HK Family Holdings. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she wrote it down. She didn't ask Stephen right away. Instead, one Sunday while Dylan was at work, she sat alone with her laptop and a growing stack of statements, cross-referencing dates, mortgage records, insurance documents, old tax filings, an inbox Stephen rarely cleaned out. None of it looked dramatic on its own. But teachers are trained to notice patterns other people miss, and slowly, a shape emerged. Every major financial emergency in the King family for a decade traced back to the same source: tuition, insurance, the dental surgery, the laptop, the vanished credit card debt, even the failed inspection business, even the refinancing. All of it the same 3 initials, like a signature no one had ever thought to question. She went to Stephen. Heather King. She went to Stephen directly the next afternoon, laid the folder on his kitchen table, and asked him plainly, "Did Heather pay for all of this?" "All of it." He didn't answer right away. He mumbled something about family finances being complicated. Not quite a lie, not quite the truth. A man with nothing to hide doesn't stumble over a simple yes. Confused, Emily called Rachel, hoping for context. That was a mistake. Rachel had never liked me. Some part of her resented that Stephen found happiness again after Diane, resented it in a way she'd never fully examined. "Heather's always had to control everything," Rachel said. "She likes people needing her." Emily didn't believe her. Something about it didn't sit right. A woman who wanted control wouldn't have spent 12 years making sure no one knew her name was attached to any of it. Instead, Emily reached out to me directly and asked if we could talk, just the 2 of us. I said yes. Thursday evening, after Stephen left for bowling league, I made tea. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once signed tuition checks Dylan never knew existed. I reached beneath it for a thick folder I'd already assembled with Margaret's help. Every receipt, every transfer, every quiet sacrifice, organized and undeniable, and set it between us. "I hoped nobody would ever need this," I told her. She went through it slowly. Tuition receipts with my signature, wire confirmations, the itemized wisdom tooth billing, the promissory note on Stephen's failed business, one I'd simply chosen never to collect on. About halfway through, her hands stilled. "He never knew," she said, not a question. "He thought his father wanted him to think that," I said gently. "I let that happen too, for a long time. I'm not blameless in it." I told her something else too, something I think she needed to hear before she left my kitchen. Every year for at least 8 years, Stephen had told me he was finally going to tell Dylan the truth. Every year he meant it. Every year, at some birthday or graduation, he found a reason to wait. He'd thank me privately, sometimes with tears, and then go stand next to his son and let Dylan believe his father had built this family alone. "That's not an accident," Emily said, her jaw tightening. "Not after 8 years." "No," I agreed. "I don't think it is anymore either." I told her I never wanted gratitude. I meant it. I did it because I loved this family, messy as it was, and because a 14-year-old boy who'd lost his mother didn't need to lose his education and stability too, over money I happened to have, and Stephen happened not to. I only ever wanted honesty. That's all I'd ask Stephen for, every single year. And every year, he'd chosen comfort instead. Emily sat with that for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Can I tell him?" I thought about it carefully, not because he didn't deserve to know, but because truth delivered to someone unready can do as much damage as the lie. "Only if he's finally ready to hear it," I said. Not to defend himself, just to listen. 3 weeks later came the engagement dinner, hosted by Emily's parents. Cloth napkins, assigned seating, a photographer for the toasts. I didn't know, walking in, whether Emily had told Dylan yet. Dinner went smoothly. Dylan looked happier than he had in weeks, the financial panic apparently patched over, though I suspected Stephen had simply found new holes to plug rather than any real resolution. When the toasts came, Stephen stood and gave his familiar speech about Dylan, about Diane, about resilience, and then the line I'd heard some version of at nearly every family event for a decade. Everything our family has built, we built together. I said nothing. I'd already decided, weeks earlier in Margaret's office, that I was done correcting the record out loud. Then Emily stood, calmly, without drama. She asked the room if she could add something. She walked to a small table where she'd set up her laptop and turned the screen to a projector her father had quietly helped her rig. The first slide, one word, family. The second, a tuition receipt. The payment source blacked out except for 2 letters, HK. Then, the insurance transfer, the dental surgery, the refinancing paperwork. She moved through them steadily, letting the documents speak. I watched Dylan's face change, confusion, then recognition, then a stillness I'd never seen on him, not even at the barbecue. He looked at the screen, then his father, then finally at me. The last slide was a spreadsheet, 12 years of emergencies, tuition, rescues, one column at the end labeled Source. Every row read the same name, Heather King. The silence in that room was unlike anything I'd experienced. Rachel tried some reflexive defense about context. Emily cut through it gently. Then why? She asked, looking at the table, at Stephen. Didn't anyone ever thank her? Not once in 12 years. No one answered. Stephen's face had gone pale. No toast to hide behind this time. He set his glass down and, for the first time in longer than I could remember, looked straight at his son. Because I was afraid, he said, his voice cracking. Afraid that if you knew everything your stepmother did, and everything I didn't, you'd stop seeing me as your father. You'd see someone who couldn't take care of you. And I couldn't survive that. Not after your mother. Not after everything we'd already lost. It was the most honest thing Stephen had said in this family, in over a decade. It took a spreadsheet on a borrowed projector to get there. Dylan stood slowly. I braced for anger. The same sharp edge from the barbecue. Instead, he walked toward me and stopped in front of my chair, and for the first time in 12 years, he couldn't find a single word to say. Things didn't fix themselves overnight. Truth rarely works that fast. But it gave everyone the chance to finally build something on an accurate foundation. Stephen started counseling on his own, 6 weeks later, and told me one evening that his silence hadn't been protecting our family. It had been protecting himself, at my expense. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He said he wanted to earn trust slowly, without expecting credit, for finally doing what should have been done years ago. Dylan's changes were quieter, but sharper. He sold the truck Stephen had secretly co-signed, bought something modest, and paid off. Picked up a second job, started making his own loan payments for the first time. Every Saturday morning, he started coming by for coffee, not for money, just to sit at the table where I'd once quietly paid for lunches he never knew about. Slowly, something genuine grew there. One morning, he set his cup down and said, "I spent years comparing you to someone who wasn't even here anymore. That wasn't fair to either of you, not to my mom, and not to you. You never had to choose between loving your mother and respecting me," I told him. Those were never the same thing. Months later, at Dylan and Emily's wedding, in a backyard not unlike the one where all of this began, Dylan stood to give his speech. He talked about Emily first, her patience, her honesty. Then he turned and looked directly at me. "There's someone else I need to thank tonight. The strongest woman in my life never once asked me to call her mom. She never asked for anything at all. She simply showed me, every single day for 12 years, what a real parent looks like. I just wasn't paying attention until recently. I'm paying attention now." I cried quietly at that table, the kind of crying that doesn't need to be hidden. Stephen held my hand through the rest of the speech, his own eyes wet. For the first time in a very long time, The years of quiet sacrifice felt seen for what they were. Not a burden I'd carried alone, but a foundation this family had been standing on all along. I don't feel angry anymore when I think about that barbecue, about Dylan telling me I'd never be half the woman his mother was. He was a young man carrying a story he didn't write, believing a version of his family handed to him in silence. I never needed him to compare me to Diane. I only ever needed honesty. Love doesn't need recognition to be real. But respect should never be optional. Not in any family. Not for any woman who has quietly held everyone else together.